The auctioneer's gavel cracked against the wooden podium like a gunshot, and Josephine Abbott felt her stomach twist into knots as she stood on the raised platform in the center of Dallas, Texas, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to appear brave. The November wind of 1877 cut through her thin cotton dress, and she wondered if this humiliation could possibly get any worse as the crowd of men below her leered and called out crude suggestions that made her cheeks burn with shame. $500, shouted a man in a stained vest, tobacco juice dribbling down his chin. 600. Another countered, his eyes roving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. This was not how Josephine had imagined her 21st year would unfold. Just 3 months ago, she had been caring for her ailing father in their small home on the outskirts of town, tending to his needs as the consumption slowly stole his breath and his life. When he died in late September, she discovered the cruel truth. He had accumulated massive debts to the coal company, debts incurred trying to keep their home warm enough through the previous brutal winter. The company had been patient while her father lived, but the moment he was in the ground, they came calling with papers and threats. She had nothing to give them. The house was mortgaged. The land was worthless. All she had was herself, and in the cruel mathematics of frontier justice, that would have to be enough. The sheriff, a portly man named Wilkins who seemed perpetually apologetic yet utterly unwilling to help, had explained that she could either go to debtor's prison or agree to indentured servitude to pay off what was owed. The auction was the mechanism by which her labor would be sold to the highest bidder for a period of 5 years. 5 years of her life, sold to a stranger to pay for coal that had already been burned and forgotten. 700. The crowd was getting rowdier, the bids climbing as the sun dipped lower in the November sky. Josephine kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, refusing to look at the men who were deciding her fate as if she were livestock. $1,000. The new voice cut through the chaos like a knife, deep and authoritative, and something in its tone made the crowd fall silent. Josephine could not help but look down to find its source. The man stood at the back of the gathered crowd, tall enough that his head cleared most of the others by several inches. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, touching the collar of his well-made coat, and his face was weathered in the way of someone who spent his days under the sun. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark blue and serious, meeting hers for just a moment before he looked back at the auctioneer with an expression that brooked no argument. $1,000, he repeated, and I will pay it now in cash. The auctioneer's eyes widened with greed. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Dalton Norwood. The crowd dispersed with disappointed grumbles, and Josephine found herself being ushered down from the platform by the sheriff, who handed her over to her new owner like a piece of property changing hands. She kept her chin high, determined not to cry, not to show weakness, even as her future crumbled around her. Dalton Norwood stood before her, even taller up close, his expression unreadable. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with strong features and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. He pulled a thick envelope from his coat and counted out bills for the sheriff and the coal company representative, who snatched the money eagerly. "Thank you, Mr. Norwood," the representative said with an oily smile. "She is yours for 5 years of service. The papers are all in order." Dalton took the papers, glanced at them briefly, and then did something that shocked everyone present. He tore them in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter to the dusty street. "What are you doing?" the coal company man sputtered. "Those are legal documents." "Those were legal documents," Dalton corrected, his voice calm. "Miss Abbott, you are free to go. The debt is paid in full. You owe nothing to anyone, and you certainly do not owe me your labor or your freedom." Josephine stared at him, unable to process what had just happened. "I do not understand. It is simple enough. I paid your debt. You are free." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture of respect that felt surreal after the degradation of the past hour. "I wish you well, miss." He turned to leave, and panic seized Josephine's chest. She had nowhere to go, no money, no prospects. Pride warred with desperation, and desperation won. "Wait," she called out, and he stopped, turning back to her with a questioning look. "Please, I have nothing. No home, no family, no means to support myself. If you need a cook or a housekeeper, I can work. I want to work to earn my way honestly." Dalton studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "I have a ranch about 10 miles north of town. I do need help with the house, as I am not much of a cook and my attempts at keeping the place clean are pitiful at best. But I would hire you as an employee with wages. You would be free to leave whenever you wished." "I accept," Josephine said immediately, relief flooding through her. "I will pay you $20 a month, plus room and board," Dalton continued. "You will have your own room, and I expect you to tell me immediately if the arrangement becomes unsuitable for any reason." $20 a month was more than generous for such work. Josephine nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. "I have a wagon just down the street. If you have belongings to collect, I can wait." "I have nothing," Josephine admitted, the words bitter but true. Everything had been sold to try to satisfy the debts. Dalton's jaw tightened, but he simply nodded and gestured for her to follow him. The wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by 2 strong horses. He helped her up onto the bench seat with careful courtesy, never touching her more than necessary, and then climbed up beside her. As they rolled out of Dallas, Josephine watched the town disappear behind them and tried to make sense of what had just happened. This stranger had paid a small fortune to free her, asked nothing in return, and was now offering her honest employment. Men did not do such things without reason, and she found herself stealing glances at his profile, trying to understand what motivated him. "Why did you do it?" she finally asked as the town gave way to open prairie. Dalton was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tinged with old pain. 7 years ago, my sister found herself in circumstances not unlike yours. Different debts, same cruel system. A man bought her contract and he was not kind. By the time I found her and bought her freedom, the damage was done. She took her own life 6 months later. Josephine's breath caught. "I am so sorry." Her name was Margaret. She was 20 years old. He kept his eyes on the road, but his knuckles were white on the reins. "I swore that if I ever had the means and the opportunity, I would prevent another woman from suffering as she did. When I heard about the auction today, I made sure to be there." "You saved me," Josephine whispered. "I did what should have been done for Margaret. What someone should always do when they have the power to help another human being." He glanced at her then, and she saw the depth of old grief in his eyes. "You owe me no gratitude, Miss Abbott. What happened to you, what nearly happened, should never occur in a just world." They rode in silence for a while, the sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as it set. The November air grew colder, and Josephine shivered in her thin dress. Without a word, Dalton shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled of leather and sage. "Thank you," she said softly. "You will need warmer clothes," he observed. "I will take you into town next week to get what you need. Consider it an advance on your wages." The ranch appeared as darkness fell, a sprawling property with a large main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Lantern light glowed in the windows, and Josephine felt a strange sense of homecoming despite never having been here before. Perhaps it was simply the relief of having a destination, a place to rest after so much uncertainty. Dalton helped her down from the wagon and led her into the house. The interior was indeed in need of a woman's touch, with dust coating most surfaces and dishes stacked haphazardly in the kitchen. But it was solidly built and warm, with a fire crackling in the hearth. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Dalton said. "There should be blankets in the trunk at the foot of the bed. I will heat some water for washing if you would like." "That would be wonderful," Josephine said, meaning it. She had not had a proper bath in weeks. As Dalton busied himself heating water on the stove, Josephine explored her new room. It was simple but clean, with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. The trunk did indeed contain blankets, thick and warm, and she ran her hands over them with something close to wonder. Just this morning, she had not known if she would sleep in a bed ever again. Dalton brought up the hot water in buckets, averting his eyes respectfully. "I will prepare something to eat," he said. "Come down whenever you are ready." Alone, Josephine stripped off her dusty clothes and washed away the grime of the day, the humiliation, the fear. The hot water was a luxury she had almost forgotten, and she took her time, letting the warmth seep into her bones. When she was clean, she realized she had nothing else to wear. Her only dress was filthy and thin, unsuitable for the approaching winter. A knock on the door made her wrap herself quickly in a blanket. "Yes, I left some things outside the door," Dalton called from the hallway. "They were Margaret's. I think they might fit you." Josephine waited until she heard his footsteps retreat before opening the door. A neat stack of clothing sat on the floor. 2 dresses, a warm shawl, undergarments, and sturdy boots. She carried them inside with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the generosity and the trust implicit in this gesture. The dresses fit reasonably well, though Margaret had been slightly taller. Josephine chose a simple brown one with long sleeves and a high collar, modest and practical. The boots were a revelation after months of worn-through shoes. When she came downstairs, Dalton had managed to produce a simple meal of fried eggs, bacon, and bread. It was not fancy, but it smelled delicious, and Josephine realized she had not eaten since the previous evening. "This looks wonderful," she said, taking a seat at the rough wooden table. Dalton sat across from her, and they ate in companionable silence. Josephine found herself studying him more openly now, noting the way his hands moved with efficient grace, the slight crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his current serious expression indicated, the strength in his shoulders that came from physical labor. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, wanting to break the silence. "I have about 500 head of cattle," Dalton replied, seeming to relax slightly at the neutral topic. "2 men who work for me full-time, good men named Charlie and Hector. They have a bunkhouse on the property. I also have some horses I am breeding, hoping to build that side of the business." "It sounds like successful work." "It is honest work," he corrected. "Success is relative. I make enough to live comfortably and to help others when I can. That is enough for me." "Is that why you had the money today? To help others?" Dalton's expression darkened slightly. "I had the money because I saved it for exactly such a purpose. After Margaret died, I vowed to keep funds available in case I encountered someone in desperate need. I have used it 3 times now, including today." "What happened to the other 2 people you helped?" "One was a Mexican family facing deportation, despite being here legally. I hired a lawyer and helped them prove their citizenship. The other was a young man facing jail for a crime he did not commit. Same solution, different problem." He met her eyes. I cannot fix all the injustices in this world, Miss Abbott, but I can address the ones I encounter. Josephine felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. This man was unlike anyone she had ever met, motivated by principles rather than profit, by compassion rather than cruelty. She realized she was staring and quickly looked down at her plate. "Please call me Josephine," she said softly. "I think we can dispense with formality, given the circumstances." "Only if you call me Dalton," he replied, and there was the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. That night, Josephine lay in her comfortable bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. Wind whispered against the walls. Somewhere outside, an owl hooted. From downstairs, she could hear the faint sounds of Dalton moving around, banking the fire, checking the locks. She thought about the turn her life had taken in the space of a single day. This morning, she had been facing slavery in all but name, 5 years of bondage to whatever man bid highest. Tonight, she was free, employed honestly, sleeping in comfort. And it was all because of a stranger with kind eyes and old wounds who had chosen to help her. Josephine did not believe in fairy tales or divine providence. Life had taught her that the world was harsh and uncaring more often than not. But lying there in the darkness, warm and safe for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel grateful. And perhaps, just perhaps, a small spark of hope that better days might lie ahead. The following morning, Josephine woke to pale sunlight streaming through her window. For a moment she was disoriented, uncertain where she was, and then memory flooded back. She dressed quickly in Margaret's clothes, braided her dark blonde hair and headed downstairs. Dalton was already up, standing at the stove and looking frustrated. The smell of burning food filled the kitchen. "Good morning," Josephine said, unable to suppress a smile at his expression. "I was attempting breakfast," Dalton admitted ruefully, poking at what might once have been eggs. "I have proven once again that my culinary skills are severely lacking. Let me help." Josephine moved to the stove, gently taking the spatula from his hand. Their fingers brushed, and she felt a jolt of awareness that surprised her. "Why do you not tell me where things are kept, and I will take over?" Dalton showed her the pantry, which was surprisingly well stocked, and the root cellar, and then retreated to the table to watch as she salvaged what she could and started fresh. Cooking had always been a comfort to Josephine, a way to create something good and nourishing from raw ingredients. She fell into the familiar rhythms easily and soon had eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits ready. "This is remarkable," Dalton said after his first bite. "I have not eaten this well in months. It is nothing fancy." "It is wonderful," he insisted. "If this is the standard of your cooking, I will consider myself fortunate indeed to have you here." After breakfast, Dalton showed her around the property. The barn housed his horses, beautiful animals with sleek coats and intelligent eyes. The 2 ranch hands, Charlie and Hector, were out checking fence lines but would be back by lunch, he explained. The property stretched as far as the eye could see in some directions, open prairie dotted with grazing cattle. "It is beautiful," Josephine said, and meant it. The vastness of the land, the endless sky, the sense of space and possibility all spoke to something deep inside her. "It can be harsh," Dalton warned. "Winter here is brutal and summer brings its own challenges. But yes, I find it beautiful too." They spent the morning companionably, Dalton showing Josephine how things worked around the ranch while she began mentally cataloging all the cleaning and organizing the house needed. It was satisfying work, the kind that would keep her hands busy and give her a sense of purpose. When Charlie and Hector returned for lunch, they were surprised to find a woman in the house but were polite and respectful. Charlie was an older man, weathered and taciturn, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Hector was younger, perhaps 30, with an easy smile and the accent of someone who had grown up speaking Spanish. "Miss Josephine is my new housekeeper," Dalton explained over the lunch she had prepared. "I expect you both to treat her with the utmost respect." "Of course, boss," Charlie said, tipping his hat to her. "Nice to have some decent cooking around here," Hector grinned. "If she can keep Dalton from burning down the kitchen, she is a miracle worker." The easy camaraderie between the men was evident, and Josephine found herself relaxing. This was a good place, she realized. A place where people treated each other with respect and kindness. She had landed in a far better situation than she could have hoped for. Over the following days, Josephine settled into a routine. She rose early to prepare breakfast for the men, spent her days cleaning and organizing the house, prepared lunch and dinner, and found herself falling into bed each night pleasantly exhausted. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in months, she felt useful and valued. Dalton was a considerate employer, always asking if she needed anything, checking that the work was not too much, offering to help with tasks that required lifting or reaching high places. They fell into an easy rhythm together, often working side by side in companionable silence. But Josephine found herself increasingly aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with their employer-employee relationship. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which happened more frequently as the days passed. The sound of his laugh when Hector told a joke at dinner. The strength in his hands when he helped her move furniture. The kindness in his voice when he spoke to the animals or to his men. She told herself it was simply gratitude, that anyone would feel warmly toward a person who had saved them as he had saved her. But gratitude did not explain the flutter in her stomach when their hands accidentally touched, or the way she found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. True to his word, Dalton took her into Dallas the following week to purchase warmer clothing and other necessities. The trip was pleasant, with easy conversation flowing between them as the wagon rolled along. In town, Dalton waited patiently while she selected practical items: warm dresses, a heavy coat, sturdy gloves, and other essentials. He paid without hesitation, brushing off her thanks. "It is an advance on your wages," he repeated, though they both knew she could not have afforded these things even with several months' salary. As they were loading the wagon for the return trip, a woman's voice called out sharply, "Dalton Norwood." They turned to see a well-dressed woman in her 40s striding toward them, her face pinched with disapproval. Behind her trailed a younger woman who looked embarrassed. "Mrs. Henderson," Dalton said politely, but without warmth. "I heard you made quite a spectacle of yourself at the auction last week," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes raking over Josephine with unconcealed disdain. "Paying good money for trash and then setting her free. What kind of foolishness is that?" Josephine felt her face flame, but before she could respond, Dalton stepped between them, his voice cold as winter ice. "I would ask you to mind your tongue, Mrs. Henderson. Miss Abbott is my employee and deserves your respect, though I suspect that is beyond your capacity." "Your employee, Mrs." Henderson let out a harsh laugh. "Is that what they are calling it now? Everyone knows what a young woman living alone with a man really is." "Then everyone is a fool," Dalton said flatly. "Miss Abbott is my housekeeper, nothing more and nothing less. If you or anyone else suggests otherwise, you will answer to me. Are we clear?" Mrs. Henderson sputtered, unused to being spoken to so directly. Her daughter tugged at her arm. "Mother, please let us go." As they walked away, Josephine let out a shaky breath. "I apologize if my presence here causes problems for you." "You have nothing to apologize for," Dalton said firmly. Mrs. Henderson is a bitter woman who finds fault with everyone. Her opinion matters not at all to me. But Josephine worried nonetheless. She knew how fragile a woman's reputation could be, how quickly gossip could destroy a life. She did not want to cause trouble for Dalton, not after everything he had done for her. That evening, as they sat at dinner, Josephine brought up the encounter again. Perhaps I should find other employment, somewhere in town where my living situation would not raise eyebrows. Dalton set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "Do you wish to leave?" "No," she admitted, "but I do not want to damage your standing in the community." "My standing in the community is solid enough to weather the gossip of small minds," Dalton said. "But if you are concerned, I can ask Mrs. Chen from the neighboring ranch to come stay a few nights a week as a chaperone. She is a widow and could use the extra income." "That seems like an unnecessary expense." "It is my expense to bear if it eases your mind." He paused, then added quietly, "I value your presence here, Josephine. You have brought warmth and life back to this house. I would not want you to leave unless it is truly what you wish." The sincerity in his voice made Josephine's heart skip. "I do not wish to leave," she said softly. "This is the first place I have felt at home since my father died." Something shifted in the air between them, a charge of unspoken feeling. Dalton's eyes held hers for a long moment before he looked away, clearing his throat. "Then it is settled. You will stay, and I will arrange for Mrs. Chen to visit regularly to satisfy propriety." Mrs. Chen turned out to be a delightful woman in her 60s, sharp, witted, and kind, who came 3 nights a week to sleep in the spare room and often helped Josephine with various tasks. Her presence did ease some of the social pressure, though Josephine suspected that Dalton's fierce defense of her reputation did more to silence the gossips. November gave way to December, and the weather turned bitter. Josephine was grateful for her warm clothes as she went about her work. The ranch prepared for winter in earnest, with the men bringing cattle closer to the buildings and stockpiling feed and supplies. Josephine found herself learning the rhythms of ranch life, understanding when the men would be out late checking on animals, when weather was turning and extra food needed to be prepared, how to read the sky for coming storms. She also learned more about Dalton through observation and occasional conversation. He was a man of deep principles and quiet generosity. When Charlie mentioned that his sister's family was struggling, Dalton sent them a side of beef and bags of flour without hesitation. When a neighbor's barn burned down, Dalton organized help to rebuild it and contributed materials. He never spoke of these acts, and Josephine only learned of them through others. She also learned about his past in fragments. He had come to Texas from Missouri 10 years earlier, at 18, with nothing but determination and a small inheritance from his grandfather. He had worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny, and eventually bought this land. His parents were dead, killed in a cholera outbreak. Margaret had been his only sibling, and her loss still haunted him. "I should have been there for her sooner," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, the wind howling outside. "I should have known she was in trouble." "You cannot blame yourself for the cruelties others inflicted on her," Josephine said gently. "You did everything you could. It was not enough." "You saved me," Josephine reminded him. "You have helped others. Margaret would be proud of that." Dalton looked at her then, firelight dancing across his features, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You are a remarkable woman, Josephine Abbott." "I am just a woman trying to survive," she said, though her voice came out softer than intended. "You are far more than that." He reached out as if to touch her hand, then seemed to think better of it and pulled back. "I should check on the horses." He left quickly, and Josephine sat alone by the fire, her hand still tingling from where his might have touched it. She was falling for him, she realized with a mixture of joy and terror. Falling for this serious, kind, complicated man who had saved her life and asked nothing in return. But what could come of such feelings? He was her employer, her benefactor. He had made it clear that their relationship was professional, that he had offered her employment out of principle, not personal interest. To imagine anything more was foolish, dangerous to the security she had found here. Yet she could not stop her heart from hoping. Christmas approached, and Josephine threw herself into preparations. She baked cookies and pies, decorated the house with pine branches and ribbons, planned a special dinner. Dalton watched her efforts with bemusement and something that looked like fondness. "I have not celebrated Christmas in years," he admitted. "Not since Margaret died." "Then it is time to start again," Josephine said firmly. "Everyone deserves some joy and celebration." On Christmas Eve, Charlie and Hector joined them for dinner, along with Mrs. Chen. Josephine had outdone herself with roasted chicken, vegetables, fresh bread, and 3 kinds of pie. The house glowed with candlelight and warmth, filled with laughter and conversation. After dinner, as the others talked and played cards, Dalton drew Josephine aside. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. "Oh, but I did not get you anything," Josephine protested, though her heart leaped. "You have given me more than you know," Dalton said quietly. "Please open it." Inside the wrapping was a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fine pen. "I noticed you sometimes write in the evenings," Dalton explained. "I thought you might like a proper book for your words." Tears sprang to Josephine's eyes. It was such a thoughtful gift, so perfectly chosen. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is beautiful." "There is something else." He pulled out an envelope. "Your wages for the past 2 months. I know I have been advancing you money for necessities, but these are your full wages, no deductions." Josephine opened the envelope and gasped. "This is too much. You paid me for November and December, but I did not start working until mid-November." "You started working the day you arrived," Dalton corrected. "And you have done far more than I expected or hoped. You have earned every penny." Holding the money and the journal, Josephine felt overwhelmed by his generosity, his kindness, his thoughtfulness. Acting on impulse, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Thank you, Dalton, for everything." When she pulled back, his eyes were dark and intense, fixed on her face. For a moment she thought he might kiss her properly, and her heart hammered with anticipation. But then Charlie called out something from the card game, breaking the spell, and Dalton stepped back. "You are most welcome," he said, his voice rough. That night, lying in bed, Josephine touched her lips and imagined what it would feel like to truly kiss him. She had been kissed before, by a boy in her hometown when she was 17, but it had been nothing like what she imagined kissing Dalton would be. That would be fire and passion, safety and excitement all at once. She hugged the journal to her chest and allowed herself to dream. Winter deepened, bringing snow and ice that transformed the ranch into a frozen landscape of stark beauty. The work became harder, with animals needing extra care and simple tasks complicated by the cold. But inside the house, warmth and comfort reigned. Josephine and Dalton spent more time together during the long winter evenings. Sometimes they read by the fire, sharing passages from books aloud. Sometimes they talked, conversations ranging from childhood memories to philosophy to dreams for the future. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, finding peace in each other's presence. Josephine learned that Dalton loved poetry but was embarrassed to admit it. That he had a beautiful singing voice but rarely used it. That he dreamed of expanding the ranch and creating a place where people who had been dealt hard hands by life could find honest work and a fresh start. Dalton learned that Josephine had wanted to be a teacher before her father's illness consumed her life, that she loved thunderstorms and hated turnips, that she sometimes woke in the night from dreams of the auction, reliving that terror, and had to remind herself she was safe. They were becoming friends, deep friends, but Josephine wanted more. She caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression that made her think he might want more too. But he never acted on it, never crossed the professional boundary he had established. January gave way to February, and one afternoon a massive storm blew in with little warning. Dalton and the ranch hands were out checking on cattle when the snow started falling in thick, blinding sheets. Josephine paced the house anxiously as the wind howled and visibility dropped to nothing. Hours passed. Darkness fell. Still no sign of the men. Josephine kept the fire roaring and hot coffee ready, fighting her rising panic. What if something had happened to Dalton? What if he was hurt, freezing, lost in the storm? The realization of how much he meant to her hit with the force of the wind battering the walls. This was not gratitude or simple affection. She loved him, loved his kindness and his strength, his quiet humor and his fierce principles, loved the way he made her feel safe and valued, loved him with an intensity that terrified and thrilled her. Near midnight, she finally heard sounds at the door. She rushed to open it, and Charlie and Hector stumbled in, covered in snow and ice. "Where is Dalton?" she demanded. "Right behind us," Charlie said through chattering teeth. He was helping with the horses. Josephine grabbed blankets and hot coffee for them, but her eyes stayed fixed on the door. Finally, it opened again and Dalton came in, snow-covered and moving stiffly with cold. "Thank God," Josephine breathed, rushing to help him with his frozen coat. "We are all safe," Dalton assured her, though his lips were nearly blue. "The cattle are secure. Everyone is accounted for." "You are freezing," Josephine said, fear making her voice sharp. "Come to the fire immediately. Charlie, Hector, there is hot stew on the stove. Serve yourselves." She steered Dalton to the chair closest to the fire and wrapped blankets around him, her hands shaking. He could have died out there. The thought made her feel sick. "Josephine," Dalton said gently, catching one of her trembling hands, "I am fine. We have weathered worse storms than this." "You are not fine, you are half frozen," she said, blinking back tears she could not explain. "You could have died, but I did not." His thumb stroked over her knuckles, the touch sending warmth through her despite the cold radiating from him. "It takes more than a bit of snow to finish me off." She knew she should pull her hand away, maintain propriety, but she could not seem to make herself let go. His eyes held hers, and in their depths, she saw the same longing she felt reflected back at her. "Josephine," he said again, his voice low and rough, "I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, Charlie called from the kitchen, "Boss, you better come look at this. I think the wind damaged part of the barn roof." The moment shattered. Dalton released her hand and stood, shaking off his fatigue. "I will be right back." Josephine watched him go, her hand still warm from his touch, her heart aching with unspoken words. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them all inside for much of that time. The close quarters and forced idleness created an intimacy that was both wonderful and frustrating. Josephine found herself constantly aware of Dalton, of where he was in the house, of every glance and word exchanged. On the third evening, when the storm finally broke and the stars emerged in a clear sky, Dalton asked if she would walk with him to check on the horses. Josephine bundled up in her warmest coat and followed him out into the crystalline night. The world was transformed, every surface covered in deep snow that sparkled like diamonds in the moonlight. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air, and the silence was profound. In the barn, the horses nickered softly as Dalton checked each one, running expert hands over legs and bodies to ensure no injuries had occurred. Josephine watched him work, loving the gentleness he showed the animals, the competence in every movement. "They are all well," Dalton pronounced finally, giving the last horse a pat. He turned to Josephine, and in the lamplight his expression was serious. "I have been thinking about what to say to you, trying to find the right words." Josephine's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" "The other night, when I came in from the storm, you looked at me with such fear and relief, and I realized that I have been a coward." He took a step closer to her. "I told myself that I offered you employment out of principle, that my motives were purely about righting a wrong. But the truth is more complicated than that." "Dalton," Josephine whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "From the moment I saw you on that platform, looking so brave despite your fear, I felt something. And these past months, getting to know you, watching you bring life and warmth to this place, to my life, that something has grown into feelings I can no longer deny or ignore." He reached out and took her hands in his. "I love you, Josephine. I have fallen completely, irrevocably in love with you." Joy burst through her like sunrise. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out. "I have tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, that I should not feel this way about my employer, but I cannot help it. I love you, Dalton. I love your kindness and your strength, your principles and your heart. I love everything about you." For a moment, they simply stood there, hands clasped, grinning at each other like fools. Then Dalton pulled her close and kissed her, and it was everything she had imagined and more. His lips were warm despite the cold, gentle but sure, and she felt cherished and desired all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly. I want to marry you if you will have me. But I need you to know that the choice is yours. You are not obligated to me in any way. If you do not want this, if you would prefer to remain simply my employee or to seek a different situation entirely, I will respect that. Your freedom is paramount." "I choose you," Josephine said firmly. "Not out of obligation or gratitude, but because I love you and cannot imagine my life without you in it. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I want to court and be courted. Yes to everything, Dalton Norwood." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the passion she had been suppressing for months. When they finally returned to the house, hand in hand, their faces were flushed with more than just cold. The next few months were among the happiest of Josephine's life. Dalton courted her with old-fashioned propriety, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof. He brought her wildflowers he found on the range, read poetry to her in the evenings, took her on long rides across the property on mild days. He also asked her opinion on ranch matters, valued her input on decisions, and made it clear that he saw her as an equal partner in all things. Josephine bloomed under his regard, growing more confident and sure of herself. They planned a wedding for late April, when the weather would be mild and the prairie in bloom. Invitations were sent to neighbors and friends. Mrs. Chen enthusiastically agreed to help with preparations. Even Charlie and Hector seemed pleased, though they expressed it through good-natured teasing. "About time the boss stopped mooning around and made an honest woman of you," Charlie said with a rare grin. "We had bets on how long it would take him to work up the courage to say something," Hector added. "I won." In March, Dalton took Josephine back into Dallas to purchase fabric for a wedding dress. As they walked through town, Josephine noticed people watching them, some with approval, others with lingering judgment. She held her head high, Dalton's arm firm under her hand. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the street ahead of them, and Josephine tensed, but the older woman simply nodded curtly and moved past without comment. Apparently even she could not find fault with a properly announced engagement. At the fabric store, Josephine selected a beautiful cream-colored silk. As the proprietor measured and cut it, Dalton wandered to another section of the store and returned with lace trim of exquisite delicacy. "For your dress," he said simply, placing it with the silk. "It is too expensive," Josephine protested, though she loved it. "Nothing is too expensive for my bride," Dalton said firmly, and the proprietor smiled at them both. As April approached, the ranch burst into life. Calves were being born, requiring round-the-clock attention. The men worked long hours, and Josephine supported them by keeping food and coffee ready at all hours. It was exhausting but rewarding work. One night, Dalton stumbled into the house near dawn, covered in blood and birthing fluids but grinning. "Twins," he announced. "Healthy heifer calves, both doing well. Their mother is fine too." Josephine laughed at his appearance and his obvious joy. "Go clean up while I make breakfast. You must be starving." As he headed upstairs, he paused and looked back at her. "I am a lucky man, Josephine Abbott." "Lucky beyond measure." "I am the lucky one," she called after him. "We are both lucky," he said, and the truth of it filled the house like light. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the prairie carpeted in wildflowers. Josephine woke in her room and allowed herself a moment to reflect on how far she had come. 6 months ago, she had stood on an auction platform, being sold like property. Today, she would marry the man she loved as a free woman, an equal partner. Mrs. Chen helped her dress, and when Josephine saw herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the elegant woman looking back. The cream silk draped beautifully. The lace trim added delicate sophistication, and her hair was pinned up with small flowers woven through it. The ceremony was held outside, under a bower of branches that Charlie and Hector had constructed. Neighbors filled the seats, along with ranch hands from surrounding properties, and several families Dalton had helped over the years. The circuit preacher, a jovial man named Reverend Matthews, beamed at them both. When Josephine walked out of the house and saw Dalton waiting for her, her breath caught. He wore a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, and the look in his eyes when he saw her was one of pure love and wonder. They spoke their vows with voices clear and certain. Dalton placed a simple gold band on her finger, and she did the same for him. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and music and dancing. Josephine danced with Dalton, with Charlie, with Hector, with neighbors she was still getting to know. She felt embraced by community, by love, by possibility. As the sun set and guests began to depart, Dalton swept her into his arms and carried her into the house amid cheers and laughter. He set her down gently in the living room, and suddenly they were alone, husband and wife. "Hello, Mrs. Norwood," Dalton said softly. "Hello, Mr. Norwood," Josephine replied, happiness bubbling up inside her. He kissed her again, slowly and thoroughly, and she felt desire unfurl inside her like a flower opening to the sun. When he led her upstairs to his bedroom, their bedroom now, she went willingly and joyfully into this new chapter of her life. Their first year of marriage was an education in partnership. Josephine learned the business side of ranching, keeping books and managing accounts with the same competence she brought to running the household. Dalton learned to share not just the work but the decisions, to talk through plans and problems rather than shouldering everything alone. They had disagreements, as any couple did. Josephine wanted to hire another ranch hand to ease the burden on Charlie and Hector. Dalton worried about the expense. They discussed it for weeks until Josephine showed him her carefully kept books and proved they could afford it. A young man named Thomas was hired, and the ranch ran more smoothly for it. Dalton wanted to buy additional land. Josephine worried they were expanding too quickly. They compromised on a smaller parcel that met their immediate needs without overextending their resources. Through it all, they learned to fight fair and love fiercely, to support each other's dreams and share each other's burdens. They learned that marriage was work, yes, but the best kind of work, building something beautiful and lasting together. In the fall of their first year, Josephine realized she was pregnant. She told Dalton one evening after dinner, simply and directly, "We are going to have a baby." He stared at her for a long moment, and then joy broke across his face like dawn. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around, laughing with pure happiness. "A baby! We are going to be parents. Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Pleased does not begin to cover what I feel," Dalton said, setting her down gently and placing a hand on her still flat stomach. Awed, grateful, terrified, excited, all of it. Pregnancy agreed with Josephine. She bloomed with health and energy, continuing to work around the ranch until Dalton and Mrs. Chen conspired to make her rest more. The baby was due in May, and as winter gave way to spring, Josephine prepared a nursery in one of the spare rooms, sewing tiny clothes and blankets with hands that shook slightly with anticipation. Dalton was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried about her health and comfort. She found it endearing even when it was frustrating. "I am not made of glass," she told him when he insisted she not lift anything heavier than a teacup. "I know that. But you are carrying the most precious cargo in the world, and I will not take any chances," he replied, so seriously that she could not help but kiss him. On a warm May evening, Josephine's pains began. Dalton rode into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Peterson, while Mrs. Chen stayed with Josephine and kept her calm. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Dalton paced the hallway outside their bedroom, desperate to help but barred from the room by Mrs. Peterson's firm orders. He could hear Josephine's cries of pain and felt utterly helpless. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, a baby's cry rang out. Dalton froze, hardly daring to breathe until Mrs. Peterson opened the door with a smile. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy. Mother and baby are both doing well." Dalton rushed past her into the room. Josephine lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. When she looked up at him, her eyes were filled with love and triumph. "Meet your son," she said softly. Dalton sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the small, red face peeking from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small, snuffling sounds. Love hit Dalton with the force of a physical blow, fierce and overwhelming. "He is perfect," Dalton whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Josephine. Thank you for this gift." They named him David after Josephine's father, with the middle name Thomas in honor of Margaret. David Norwood made his presence known in the household immediately, with powerful lungs and strong opinions about when he wished to eat and sleep. Josephine took to motherhood with the same grace she brought to everything else, though the sleepless nights and constant demands were exhausting. Dalton helped as much as he could, walking the floor with David at night, changing diapers with fumbling but willing hands, singing to his son in the early morning hours. Charlie and Hector were utterly charmed by the baby, taking turns visiting to hold him and make ridiculous cooing sounds that made Josephine laugh. Mrs. Chen declared herself an honorary grandmother and was frequently at the house helping and offering advice. As David grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch grew with him. Dalton's horse breeding program became successful, with buyers coming from as far away as Kansas and Missouri to purchase his stock. The cattle operation expanded. They hired 2 more hands and built an addition onto the house. Josephine continued to keep the books and manage the household, now with an energetic little boy underfoot. She also started a small school on the ranch property, teaching the children of their workers and neighboring families. It fulfilled her old dream of being a teacher and provided a valuable service to the community. When David was 3, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Julia Margaret, honoring Dalton's lost sister. Julia was different from David in every way, quiet where he was boisterous, thoughtful where he was impulsive. She had Josephine's blonde hair and Dalton's blue eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. With 2 children, the household became even more chaotic and joyful. Dalton often came in from the range to find David racing around the house while Julia toddled after him, both of them squealing with laughter while Josephine tried to maintain some semblance of order. "This is madness," Dalton said one evening, scooping up both children. "This is family," Josephine corrected, and he could not argue with that. The years flowed like water, each bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard times, certainly. A drought in 1883 that tested their resources and resolve. A difficult winter in 1885 that claimed some of their herd. Childhood illnesses that had Josephine and Dalton sitting up all night with fevered children, praying and hoping. But there were far more good times. Birthdays and holidays celebrated with abundance and love. Watching David learn to ride and Julia learn to read. Quiet evenings when the children were asleep and Josephine and Dalton could sit together on the porch, holding hands and watching the sunset. The ranch became known as a place where people down on their luck could find fair work and a fresh start, just as Dalton had dreamed. They employed men and women of all backgrounds, asking only that they work hard and treat others with respect. Some stayed for a season, others for years, but all left better off than they had arrived. Josephine's school grew, eventually moving to a dedicated building that served children from miles around. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, preparing the next generation for a world that was changing rapidly. In 1886, David turned 7 and Julia 4. Josephine looked at her life and marveled at how different it was from what she could have imagined. She had been saved from slavery and found freedom, but more than that, she had found purpose, partnership, and profound love. One evening, as she and Dalton prepared for bed, she said, "Do you ever think about that day, the auction?" "Sometimes," Dalton admitted. "I think about how close I came to not being there, to missing my chance to help you. I think about how my entire life changed in the space of minutes. How everything terrible that happened led me to everything good I have now." She turned to face him. "I would not change a single moment, even the painful ones, because they brought me here." "I think about how empty this house was before you came," Dalton said, pulling her close. "How empty my life was. You filled it with light and love and purpose. You and our children are my greatest blessing." They held each other in the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other completely. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under stars that had witnessed their unlikely love story, from auction block to wedding altar to this moment of perfect contentment. 2 years later, Josephine gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named James. With 3 children, the house was perpetually noisy and messy, and filled with love. Josephine had to hire help for the household, and eventually turned the school over to a younger teacher, though she still visited and assisted. Dalton, now in his mid-30s, had achieved the success he had worked for, but more importantly, he had built the kind of life that honored Margaret's memory. He helped people, employed people, treated everyone with dignity and respect. He raised his children to value kindness and fairness above all else. David grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and often said he would run it someday. Julia was creative and dreamy, always drawing or making up stories. James, still a baby, was sweet-natured and smiled at everyone. In the summer of 1889, on their 9th wedding anniversary, Dalton surprised Josephine with a trip into Dallas, just the two of them, leaving the children with Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands. They had dinner at the finest restaurant in town, talking and laughing like the young couple they had been, though they were both approaching their 30s now and felt the weight of responsibility and parenthood. Afterward, they walked through the town as the sun set. "Do you remember the fabric store?" Dalton asked, stopping in front of it. "Where you bought the lace for my wedding dress," Josephine confirmed. "I was so nervous that day. I wanted everything to be perfect for you." "It was perfect. Everything has been perfect, Dalton." "Not perfect," he corrected gently. "We have had struggles and difficulties, but we have faced them together, and that has made all the difference." They continued walking until they reached the square where the auction had taken place 12 years earlier. The platform was long gone, the space now a pleasant park with benches and trees. "I stood right there," Josephine said, pointing, "terrified and trying to be brave." "I stood there," Dalton said, indicating a spot several yards away, "furious at the injustice of it all, determined to help." "You did more than help. You gave me back my life." Josephine took his hands. "You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. A home, a family, love, purpose. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Dalton said, and kissed her there in the square where their story had begun. As they walked back to the hotel where they would spend the night, Josephine thought about the arc of her life. From orphan to daughter, from daughter to caregiver, from caregiver to auction block, from auction block to freedom, from employee to wife, from wife to mother and partner and teacher. Every role had shaped her, taught her, brought her closer to the woman she was meant to be. And through it all, since that November day in 1877, Dalton had been her anchor, her partner, her love. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. David did indeed take over much of the ranch operation as he grew into a capable young man. Julia's artistic talents led her to study in Houston, though she always returned home with new paintings and stories. James showed an aptitude for the horse breeding program and often worked with his father. In 1895, Josephine was surprised to discover she was pregnant once more at 39. The pregnancy was harder than her earlier ones, and both she and Dalton worried. But in the spring of 1896, she delivered a healthy daughter they named Rose. Rose was their unexpected blessing, a joyful child who brought laughter and light to the household, even as Josephine and Dalton aged into their 40s. Their older children adored their baby sister, and she was thoroughly spoiled by everyone. As the new century approached, Josephine sometimes looked at Dalton, now in his mid-40s with gray threading through his dark hair, and marveled that he was even more handsome to her than he had been as a young man. Time and shared experience had only deepened her love for him. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked one evening, catching her watching him as he read a letter from Julia. "That I love you more now than I did on our wedding day," Josephine said. "I did not think that was possible, but it is true." "I know exactly what you mean," Dalton said, setting aside the letter and pulling her close. "Every year, every day with you is a gift. I never take it for granted." They kissed, the comfortable, familiar kiss of long married lovers who still found passion and romance in each other's arms. In 1900, the ranch celebrated 23 years under Dalton's ownership and 15 years of the Norwood family. It had grown from a modest operation to one of the most respected ranches in North Texas, known not just for quality livestock, but for fair treatment of workers and commitment to community. David, now 22, married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was held on the property, under the same bower where Dalton and Josephine had exchanged vows 23 years earlier. Josephine cried happy tears as she watched her son pledge himself to his bride, remembering her own wedding day. Julia, at 19, announced her engagement to an artist she had met in Houston. Dalton was skeptical at first, but when he met the young man, a kind and talented person named Robert, he gave his blessing readily. James, at 15, was already helping run the horse operation and showing business acumen beyond his years. Rose, at 4, was the darling of the family, charming everyone with her bright personality. As Josephine stood on the porch one evening in late 1900, watching the sun set over the land she loved, Dalton came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day? When I offered you employment, I said I had nothing," Josephine recalled. "No home, no family, no means to support myself. And now look at what we have built together. Home, family, prosperity, and love, so much love." Josephine turned in his arms to face him. "I would go through it all again, every hardship, every fear, every difficult moment, because it led me to you." "As would I," Dalton said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Norwood." They stood together as darkness fell, two people who had found each other in the midst of injustice and built a life of profound justice, kindness, and love. The ranch house glowed behind them with warm light and the sounds of family. Before them, the prairie stretched into darkness, peaceful and eternal. The years that followed brought the natural progression of life. David and Sarah had children, making Josephine and Dalton grandparents. Julia married Robert and divided her time between their home in Houston and the ranch. James eventually married as well, to a smart young woman who shared his passion for horses. Rose grew from delightful child to lovely young woman. Josephine, now in her 50s, had slowed down somewhat but remained active in the community, her school legacy continuing through the teachers she had trained. Dalton, in his late 50s, gradually turned more of the ranch operation over to David and James, though he still rode out most days to check on things. They had achieved something rare and precious. A truly good life, built on love and partnership, weathering storms and celebrating joys together. Their love story, which had begun in such unlikely circumstances, had grown into something legendary in the local community. Young couples sometimes asked them for advice, and Dalton and Josephine always said the same things. Treat each other with respect. Communicate honestly. Never stop choosing each other. Remember that love is both a feeling and an action. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1907, their children threw them a grand celebration. The whole community turned out, people whose lives had been touched by their kindness, their fairness, their example of what partnership could be. As Josephine and Dalton danced together under the stars, she said, 30 years. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I would live it all again, Dalton said. Every moment, every day. With you, always with you. And I with you, Josephine replied, resting her head on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. They lived long lives, Josephine and Dalton, growing old together with grace and continued love. They saw their grandchildren grow and thrive. They saw the ranch continue to prosper under their son's leadership. They saw the new century bring changes and challenges, but their love remained constant through it all. Josephine never forgot where she had come from, the terror of that auction platform, the cruelty of a system that would sell human beings to pay debts. She used her resources and influence to help others in similar situations, to advocate for legal reforms, to ensure that no one else would suffer as she had. Dalton never stopped being the man who would pay any price to help someone in need, to right wrongs, to act with principle and compassion. His legacy was not just the successful ranch, but the countless lives he had touched and improved. In their final years, when both were slowed by age, they spent long hours on the porch, holding hands and watching the prairie they loved. They talked about their life together, about their children and grandchildren, about the journey from that November day in 1877 to this peaceful present. "No regrets?" Dalton asked one evening. "Not a single one," Josephine said firmly. "You saved me, Dalton, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "You brought me back to life after Margaret's death. You gave me purpose and joy and love. We saved each other." And that was the truth of it, Josephine thought. They had found each other in the midst of darkness and created light together. They had built not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love and kindness that would echo through generations. As the sun set on another day, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Josephine Norwood held her husband's hand and felt complete contentment. Their love story, which had begun in the worst of circumstances, had become something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of justice, and the transformative nature of true love. Years later, long after both Josephine and Dalton had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their great-grandchildren would still tell the story of how they met. The rancher who paid a fortune to set a woman free. The woman who chose to stay and build a life with the man who had saved her. The love that grew from that unlikely beginning into something that shaped an entire family, an entire community. The ranch continued under their descendants' care, still operating on the principles Dalton and Josephine had established: fair treatment, honest work, community support, and above all, kindness. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward their legacy, telling their story to new generations as an example of what love could accomplish, what two people committed to each other and to justice could build. The old house stood for over a century, eventually becoming a historical landmark. Tour guides would point out the room where Josephine had slept that first night, the kitchen where she had cooked that first breakfast, the porch where Dalton had proposed. They would tell the story of the auction, the rescue, the love that followed. But the real legacy was not in buildings or land or even in the story itself. It was in the example Josephine and Dalton had set, the demonstration that one person choosing to act with compassion could change everything. That love rooted in respect and partnership could weather any storm. That from the worst circumstances could grow the most beautiful outcomes. Their love story became the foundation upon which their entire family was built, a reminder that everyone deserved dignity, freedom, and the chance to build a life of their own choosing. That the right choice, even when difficult or expensive, was always worth making. That love, true love, was the greatest adventure and the most worthwhile investment anyone could make. And so their story lived on, long after they were gone, inspiring others to act with kindness, to choose love, to believe that even from the darkest moments light could emerge. Josephine and Dalton Norwood had found each other in November of 1877 on an auction platform in Dallas, Texas, and from that unpromising beginning had built a love that lasted not just their lifetimes but echoed through generations, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and commitment to another human being.